And this is Real Estate Underground.
Greetings and salutations, Real Estate Undergrounders. It's Ed Matthews again with the Real Estate Underground podcast. As we have grown this podcast, and first off, thank you very much for all your subscriptions and your downloads and your likes and your comments. I want to also tell you that we've been working really hard to get more national oriented guests, and so obviously we're based here in Connecticut, but I've always been intrigued by the southeastern market and mid-Atlantic markets as well. And so I found this gentleman probably about 6 months ago. I came across him and his wife Kristen and their real estate practice, and then I started to dig in and realize, wow, this guy really is doing well, and he's serving a whole lot of people in a whole lot of ways. So Luke Andrews, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for your time today, and I'm excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, Ed, I'm really excited to be here. It is fantastic to meet you, and can't wait to talk a little real estate here.
Yeah, let's get into it. All right. So obviously you and I have similar backgrounds in that we've started off in corporate America, and then found our way into the real estate world different ways, but it's a journey, and there's multiple paths, right? So so why don't we start off with who you are, what your business is, and let's talk about that, or businesses are.
Sure. So I'm Luke Andrews, like you said. I'm based in Louisville, Kentucky. So my team services the Kentucky and Southern Indiana markets. And my real estate business really has about three phases to it. So one, we've got the sales side. So I am in production. I do some, helping clients buy and sell homes, but I also manage a team of 21 agents. Wow. So really kind of helping them grow, develop the mentorship there. So that's kind of phase one, is the sales side. Phase two is the investment side. So I do buy, a few flips, but mostly buy and holds, and then starting to get into some short-term rental Airbnb stuff as well.
Nice.
Fortunate enough to be in what I call the 40 under 40 club. So I did purchase my 40th rental property before I turned 40, just kind of squeaked in barely under that wire. And then the third aspect of my business is something relatively new, and that's been the education side, and primarily working with real estate agents and some with investors as well, but really trying to take my experience working with new agents, new investors, people like that, and trying to help people eliminate some of the mistakes, learn from some of the ones that we made, so we can shorten and flatten those learning curves and try to get people as successful as possible.
Excellent. Well, so obviously, this is a real estate investment show, so we're going to focus mostly on the deals that you've done in your coaching.
Sure.
But in terms of, your background and where you come from and all that, what drew you to real estate as a potential asset class?
So it was something I've always had a little bit of interest in. Got to dabble in it initially. My wife and I, we built our first house in 2006 in Denver, and we built it right at the very height of the market, and even overbuilt for the neighborhood that we were in. And then obviously, 2008, 2009 hit.
Yep.
And that was right in the time where our family was expanding, and it was like, hey, we need to upgrade. And fortunately for us, everything was on sale to go upgrade.
Right.
But we were in no position to sell our first house.
Right.
But we were able to keep that house. We were able to float that note. Market was flooded with, an abundance of actually really good renters who just got caught up in a bad loan before.
Right.
So we had our pick of the litter, so to speak. So we had some great tenants in there, and it was really just started by keeping our first house. And even when we moved away from Denver and back to Kentucky, we actually kept that property out there for several years and managed it from afar.
Wow.
And then beyond that, it was talking to a friend, like you talked about. We had similar backgrounds coming from the corporate world. I had a coworker that I was working with, and we both just interested in kind of getting into this real estate investment game.
Yep.
And we decided we were going to buy one property together. We were going to find, there was this up and coming neighborhood where you could find a little shotgun house that needed a decent amount of work for about $20,000. So we were going to buy it, pay cash, fix it up, do the work ourselves,
Yep.
rent it, and then just gradually kind of build it. well, it's luck, serendipity, whatever you want to call it. He's having dinner with his girlfriend's parents. They've got some friends over and he's talking to him about what he does, but he's talking to him about real estate investing. And they said, hey, interesting enough, we're actually investors, but we're getting ready to retire. We want to sell our portfolio. Are you interested in buying it? And he was like, oh, well, hey, send me over the details and I'd love to take a look at one or two of them. And they were like, no, 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 no. You buy the whole thing or you buy nothing. And so it was like 13 doors falling into our lap.
Wow.
I analyzed the deal. It was a phenomenal deal. The problem was we didn't know anything about taking on 13 properties.
Right.
We didn't know anything about how to manage those, about how to find financing. And even when we could find financing, we couldn't afford it. Like we couldn't afford a down payment at that point.
Yep.
And so we went to people who had done it before us, who had been doing it successfully.
Smart.
And just started asking a lot of questions.
Yep.
And, we got to one that we knew fairly well. And we're like, hey, what would you do in this deal? And he said, well, he was like, if I were you, I'd bring on a partner like me to help split the costs and the work.
Right.
And so we decided that was a great opportunity. So he was going to be a 50% partner. We were 50% partners.
Okay.
The only issue that we ran into there, we still didn't have enough for 50% of the down payment. And so it was just like we kept hitting roadblock after roadblock after roadblock, but knew that this was a really solid deal. So some outside the box thinking, I said, okay, we're going to hire a property manager for this thing. I said, asking this other guy, why don't you put up our deficit for us? So we'll bring everything that we can. You make up the deficit. We'll remain 50-50 partners and we'll manage these properties for free on a schedule until we get that deficit paid back. So what that did, it did a couple of things for us. One, it got us in the game, right?
Right.
But number two, we learned so much. I mean, it was trial by fire going out there.
Sure,
and I mean, just
absolutely.
learning so much, taking on these 13 properties that had some deferred maintenance and had some things with it. And so that schedule was really designed to pay back in about 15 to 16 months.
Yep.
We were able to raise the rents enough that we got it done in about 7.
Wow. Congrats.
So we were even, and we had actually raised the rents enough to where the values had gone up enough that we turned around, we refied, we pulled the money out, and then turned around and found a package of 14 more to go out and buy. So our portfolio went from 13 to 27 in, about a year.
Wow.
So we hit it pretty quickly, but there were a lot of areas where we could have easily just said, it's a great deal, but it's just not in the cards for us right now.
Right. Yeah. Resourcefulness is a quality that I see that most investors have in infinite quantities, right? It's not, it's the old Kiyosaki thing. It's not, can I buy this? It's how can I buy this? Right.
Yes. That is by far, people ask me all the time, like, what's your favorite quote from a book? And that's exactly it. And I use that for all kinds of areas of my life. It's not, I can't do this. It's how can I do this?
Right. How can we make it work? And the fact is that, being that dog on a bone is what separates the wheat from the chaff, so to speak. Right.
Well, it does. And I mean, but it really starts with being able to analyze a deal and knowing if it's a deal worth chasing.
Right.
So once you get to that point, yeah.
Yeah. So when you're looking at a deal like that, what are you looking for?
It really did. I mean, back then we didn't know a lot of what we were looking for. It was just like, I knew how to kind of run comps and I could say, okay, I think that this makes a lot of sense at this point. Now we're looking for cash flow. Mm-hmm. Like I'm not buying with the hopes of appreciation down the road. Right. That's one of the things that I try to teach new investors is, and I know with interest rates where they are and values and prices going where they're going, ROI is going down significantly.
Yep.
But it's still, don't buy on appreciation has always been my advice. It's because if it still has to cash flow, because I can't guarantee what appreciation is going to do. Right. And at the end of the day, if it's not cash flowing and I don't have enough money to put in there, the appreciation down the road doesn't really matter if I can't afford to pay the bills today.
Agreed. And that's, I couldn't agree more. I mean, the fact is that the reason that real estate is considered recession resistant is because of cash flow, right? It has nothing to do with appreciation. Right. The fact is values fluctuate on a monthly, quarterly, annual basis. And there's not a whole heck of a lot you can do about that, especially in the residential world. Commercial, you can force appreciation,
Sure,
but there's only so much you can do there as well. But it's cash flow that gets you through the hard and lean times, right?
that's right. And the appreciation, that's just my bonus. I mean, that's the
Right.
icing on top that
Feel the exact
you know
same.
that yeah.
Yeah. So, excuse me. So, obviously you're a coach and you help other people launch their careers. One of the phenomena that I had noticed is that, or that I've discovered over the years is, I belong to I used to run the local RIA here, Real Estate Investor Association, with a few partners. And, one of the things that we recognized when we first took over was that a huge portion of the people go through the training, spend the time, spend the money, spend the effort, and then don't do anything, right?
Yeah.
And so you're nodding. So I think you probably have seen similar things. Why do you think that is?
I think there's a couple of reasons. One, especially with the advent of social media. I mean, social media does some phenomenal things, and there are some very well-known podcasts that are out there that talk about real estate investing. Yeah. And they'll give you the truth, but they give you kind of half the truth. I mean, they're always painting it in a rosy way because they need
Sure.
people to tune in.
Right.
And people on Instagram and TikTok, I mean, they're all just like, look at my highlight reel. Right. So it turns out it's not quite as easy as everybody thinks that it is. Nope. Even when you've got a property manager, it's not mailbox money like they tell you it is. There's still a good amount of work that goes along into it. But a lot of it, I think, is just time. So I looked at this, like when I made my transition out of the corporate world into full-time real estate, my wife and I set up a 24-month transition plan for getting out of the corporate world and the things that we had to do, milestones we had to hit before I could go full-time entrepreneur real estate. But then we had a second 24-month plan of kind of that first 24 months, kind of going, Correct. Getting into it and being business owners. Yep. And like the initial 24-month plan, we hit our milestones quick. Like I actually finished that in about 10 months. So that was phenomenal. But that second 24-month plan of moving in, it took every bit of that 24 months. Now, the first 6 months, crazy easy. I mean, like because even you're just running off adrenaline. Right. And even when you're getting kicked in the teeth, it's like, man, I'm out here, I'm doing it. Things are great. Right. But months kind of 7 through 12, 7 through 13, they start getting a little bit tougher. Yeah. And months 13 through 23 and 13 through 24, man, they're just damn hard. Like it is really, really hard out there. So if you don't have that resilience to fight through, right, it makes it tough and you want to give up.
So we always talk about the easy stuff and the fun stuff, right? So let's talk about the hard stuff. So in that 13 to 24 month time frame, what were some of the things you were challenged by?
Well, and mine was a little bit different than what some of your audience is, because I was also coming in and starting a real estate agency, a practice of being an agent, being a team leader. Yeah. So that was all a piece of it. But also, I mean, with the properties that we had, that's around the time when leases start turning over. Mm-hmm. And when you're managing the properties yourself, plus you have a full-time job, right. Trying to show properties like that is just, I mean, that's a full-time job in itself. Absolutely. But that's also the time that new tenants come in and all of a sudden all the water heaters go out at the same time, right. Or, one goes out and then, all the other one tenant hears and they're like, oh, well, I want a new water heater. I want a new furnace. I want this, I want that. And so you kind of start stacking these, not problems, but just challenges. Sure. That are all coming together. And then it starts to really feel like, okay, and now we've got a month or two of negative cash flow. Is this really, or are we going to be okay? Yeah. So you got to stay on top of it, but you have to stick with it, and you have to know what that plan looks like, be able to analyze that deal and know that if it really is a good deal, that you've got to stick with it and that it's going to turn itself around.
One of the other things you said that really hit home with me is the numbers, cash flow, right? And whether you're positive or negative. And, so many people, I mean, I've been guilty of it at one point or another. The fact is that the chase, finding the deals, getting them done, getting them, in place, and, over the finish line and closed and stabilized, That's fun, right? It's hard work, but it's fun.
Yeah.
Accounting and operations and asset management, a little dry, right?
Very dry.
And so, one of the things that I see a lot of investors stub their toe on is not paying attention to their numbers, right? Not understanding, is each building property, single family home, multifamily home, doesn't matter. Is each property producing the cash flow that you anticipated? And if so, great. How can you grow it? Asset management, right? And if not, what can you do about it, right? And
well,
so
I'm so glad that you brought that up, because now, putting on my real estate agent hat, being an investor myself, I tend to lean towards the investor market of people that I'm working with. I work with a lot of investors themselves, and especially relatively new investors, because I like to help them get their start. It's just a passion project of mine. But when we go to view and potentially purchase some of these properties, when you find these owners who are just kind of have one or two, like one fourplex or like a duplex and a single family, the record keeping is so unbelievably poor. And so when you're having the conversations with them and they tell you like, oh yeah, we made X amount of dollars last year. And then when you really start digging into one, they'll send you over a piece of notebook paper,
right.
that they tore out of a spiral notebook. It's still got the little things on the side of it.
Yep.
It's all handwritten. And then, but when you really start digging into it, you realize that they actually lost money, and they weren't. And from talking to them, they weren't trying to BS you throughout the thing. They really just didn't know. They didn't know what they were looking for. They didn't know that they lost money.
Right.
They're thinking, hey, I've got this great investment. I'll turn around and sell it. And then I got to tell them like, hey, man, your property's not worth what you think it is. Like, this thing isn't making money. I got to do this, this, and this just to get it to a point where I can cash flow positive.
Right. Right. So true. I mean, and that's not necessarily exclusive to residential buildings as well. I mean, the fact is, a few months back, I was looking at a 16-unit property in East Hartford, which is one of the smaller cities here in Connecticut. And in talking to the seller, I asked him for his T12, and the response was, "Well, most of my residents pay cash, so I don't keep track."
Oh, geez.
Oh, really?
Can you imagine if you were an IRS agent at that point, or
right? Yeah, I'm not going to tell you where it
was,
was, but yeah, I know. God, how do you do that? Right? Yeah, if the IRS comes knocking on your door, you've got a pretty big bill to.
Yes, yes. You got
a legal bill,
lot of explaining,
accounting bill, and a whole lot of explaining. Right? Yeah. So yeah, it's amazing. I was just looking at a 36 unit in Oklahoma, and it seemed like a pretty good deal, and I think it was a good deal. We ultimately didn't win it, but the same thing. The gentleman who owned it had hired a property management company that unfortunately ripped him off. And so when I asked for the T12s and the invoices, he's like, I don't have any of it. It's and so then you're trying to work with them to figure out, okay, exactly how many, what is the economic occupancy of this building, and can I build a business model on that? And sometimes yes, sometimes no.
100%. And I think you bring up an excellent point there about property managers, that you, especially as a new investor, you really need to vet some of these folks, because there are a few that will take advantage of it. Yep. And there are some that are just, they're no better at record keeping than you are. And it's not, again, not for anything malicious. It's just, it's not in their wheelhouse. And it's like, well, hey, they're only going to charge me 8%, and this one wants to charge me 11. Well, yeah, I get it that you don't want to give up the 3%, but is the 8% at the end of the day, you might as well be managing it yourself.
Right. Yeah. If I'm going to pay an extra 3% and my books are going to be clean, I'll sign up for that all day.
100%.
Right. So, you had mentioned early on that, when you were trying to buy that first portfolio from your partner's girlfriend's parents. Is that right? I got that right.
It was my business partner's girlfriend's parents' friends.
Oh, friends.
They were all having dinner at the parents' house.
I missed that one last jump.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, it's quite the trail.
So, you mentioned, one of the ways that you got that deal done was seeking advice from people that had been doing this for a while. So I'm curious about that in terms of the advice and the mentorship that you've received. What's the best advice you ever got, and who gave it to you?
Best advice that I ever got was, it's as simple as can be, but one of my big mentors in real estate, both in the sales and the investment side, Mr. Jay Pitts here in Louisville, he said, you make your money when you buy, not when you sell. Yes. And it was just, that is always stuck with me, even before we got, obviously I didn't have as much control over the place that I had in Denver, but when we bought this package, we knew that the price was so good that was going to set us up for the future, because that was just ingrained in my head. You make your money when you buy, not when you sell.
Exactly.
And it was like that for flips and STRs and everything else that we're doing.
Yeah. So, when you look at sharpening the saw, right, and, growing yourself, and I know that, you obviously help other people do this, but I'm sure, leaders are readers, right? So, I'm curious, two things really. One is, how do you consume information, podcasts or audiobooks or regular books or, videos on YouTube or something else? And then I'll ask the next question. But
so for me, it's all podcasts and it's audiobooks. Like, it's sitting down and reading for me. Like, I used to love it. I struggle with it now. And part of it's because I'm in the car so much, or I'm exercising, or whatever it is. So audiobooks are the way that I can consume as much as possible. Like I said, that and podcasts. So those are my go-tos constantly.
Okay. So that leads to the next question, which is, what are you paying attention to these days, or who are you paying attention to these days, in terms of authors and creators?
So for me, I tend to go back to the tried and trues. Like, it's like, from a podcast perspective, I'm listening to several, because in some of it, like a Bigger Pockets that's out there. I'm not necessarily following everything that they're doing. I'm actually listening to them as an agent and as an investor.
Right.
I want to know what these other investors are taking from it, especially these newer investors, because I know the majority of them are listening to that. And so it's like, I have people call me and try to pitch me all day long.
Sure.
And I'm like, yeah, I heard that episode as well, buddy. I know exactly what you got here.
Yeah. Episode 506.
Are you actually a cash buyer or?
Right.
So, but from a book perspective, I tend to read the same books over and over again. I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad once a year. I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad's Cash Flow Quadrant once a year. I read Think and Grow Rich at least once a year. I read Shoe Dog by Phil Knight at least once a year. Just the fascinating story that Nike should not be where it should have been bankrupt. Even after it was Nike, it should have been bankrupt numerous times. Just the resilience aspect of that is just a fascinating story. And
that's inspiring.
I use it as inspiration and to just persevere and go on. So
excellent. So it's interesting. You get like through podcasts. I always hear. I want to know, what other people are seeing. Right. I'm always wary of confirmation bias, and I'm pretty good at convincing myself of things. And so listening to podcasts, meeting guys like you and reading blogs and listening to audiobooks and all that. I really want to know what other people are seeing in the market, at the time that we're talking, right? Podcasts are great that way. YouTube videos are great that way. Blogs are even great that way. And so, but the other part of it is, and I think that, with books in particular, audio, I'm an audiobook guy too. You're basically boiling down 5-10 years of the author's experience into 250 pages, right?
Right.
And so, and I'm a firm believer in history repeats itself, right? So, we're looking down the barrel of potentially a pretty substantial recession, especially here in the Northeast. People are, half the world is saying this is 2008 all over again, which I don't believe. Or that it's a what was the term I heard, a soft landing, and it's probably somewhere in between, but I'm always curious about what others are seeing out there. So I'll ask you. You're in Kentucky, I'm in Connecticut. What's your market like these days?
Our market's still as hot as can be. Now we're always going to lag behind. It's being kind of middle of the country, low median price points, we're always going to lag behind the coasts. I like to say there's a famous line from the show Parks and Rec. He was like, they're just citizens here are just now getting into nirvana. I don't have the heart to tell them what's going to happen in 1994. It's so we're still riding that wave. We're still riding high. I mean, we took a little bit of a pullback, in November, December, and just a touch of January. But right now we're still at a massive inventory shortage. We've got a lot of industry here in our town, and so there's people constantly moving and shaking. And now that everybody has kind of just come to grips with the interest rates that we've got, we're just back at a more normal level. That 2.75 was phenomenal, and if you got it,
great,
hold it.
Good times.
I mean, it's if you got to move, you got to move, and we're not the early 80s where it's 18%. So
right. I mean, historically, we're spot on where interest rates typically are in that 6 to 8% range, right?
Yeah,
that's reality. So this is people are talking about the new normal. Well, no, this is just normal.
Yeah, it's not the new normal. It's just
right.
It's different than what it has been.
Right.
And we say that from a real estate market because I see all these articles, and I was invited on a panel yesterday, and we were discussing an article that said, well, we're seeing year over year sales down. Miami was seeing it down like 25% in the single family homes, 38% in condos, from this time last year. And I said, it's perfectly fine. And we probably needed a little bit of a slowdown, and we're actually back to like 2019 kind of sales numbers. And in that case, if you go back to any agent that was in the business in 2019, that was the best year that they'd ever had.
Yeah.
Leading up to that, 2019 wasn't a bad year by anybody's standards. Now, was it 2021 and early 22? No, it wasn't that high. But I mean, it's not like we've pulled back to next to nothing and agents can't eat.
Right.
We're back to even above normal at this point.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily a demand problem; it's an inventory problem, right?
Yeah, it's and I don't see anything that's going to solve that at this point. I really don't, other than people who are just sticking around in these 2.75 rates that they got and not willing to give them up.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's something to be said for that.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's tens of thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars in interest savings over a 30-year.
Absolutely.
Right. So, all right. Well, hey, Luke, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Congratulations on all your success. I'm curious, when you are not saving the world from real estate, what do you like to do with your family?
So my kids I've got two boys that are 13 and 11, both very active in sports. And I know that we're coming up on a time where I'm not going to be able to coach them any longer. Right. So I'm coaching any and everything that I can. Yeah. They're both big into basketball and football. And then I've got a younger one that plays golf as well. And so it's, I'm trying to be as present and involved as I can.
Awesome.
But with the real estate ventures and coaching my kids, I have time for, sometimes I get to sleep.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's worth it, right? Because
absolutely.
You only get them for 18 years.
But that's right.
They're only home for 18 years. And so I'm a little bit beyond you in that I've got a 15-year-old and a 20-year-old. And 20-year-old's a sophomore in college, and the two girls, and she's having the time of her life and experiencing new things, and mom and dad aren't really cool to hang out with anymore. And
I know.
15-year-old agrees.
I'm dreading those days.
Yeah.
Dreading.
Yeah. Well, it's, they come back, but usually when they want tuition, they come back.
Yeah, that's right. When they want money, they come back.
Right. So, hey, Luke, if people want to learn more about your business or, catch up with you online, what's the best way to reach you?
I am by far most active on LinkedIn. So you can find me on LinkedIn, or, you can go to my website. It's got all of my books there, lukeandrews.us. You could always send me an email. I do answer all my own emails. I don't have a VA doing it. luke@lukeandrews.us. Or, actually, if you've got relatively new investors in there, I wrote a book not long ago. It was my third book that I wrote, and it was strictly for investors and trying to help them avoid some of the mistakes that I made early on. If they go to 10investormistakes.com, and that's the number 10, so 10investormistakes.com, they can download that book absolutely free.
Wow, that's really generous. Thank you. That's wonderful. Well, Luke, it's a pleasure. Congratulations. And I'm actually going to be down in Louisville, hopefully in the next month or so. So I'd love to buy you a cup of coffee and
yeah. Hey, look me up while you're here, man. We'll be happy to get together with you.
I'd like that. All right. Luke Andrews, thank you so much.
Thank you.